Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Late Night Happy Hour. Brian Kamenetzky, Andy Kamenetzky coming to you after Game 1 of the Western Conference Finals, a thorough stomping of the Denver Nuggets by the LA Lakers. Joined tonight, we're going quad box, Andy. We've never gone quad box before.
Very exciting.
We're doing it tonight. And I actually
no better way to celebrate the
Shouldn't have
Western
done that.
Conference off to such a big victory for the Lakers than through upgraded technology, like us really pushing the limits of what you can do during a live stream show. I don't think in the history of live stream anybody has ever attempted two guests. Like, to the best of my knowledge, this is the first time it's ever happened. So I'm very excited by this. Brian,
You
you
guys
look
keep talking because I can't hear. Hold on.
Oh, Brian, I don't know why you can't hear us, but
This is off to a great start. This is
What
like a
happens
Denver
when you
Nuggets.
aim for the stars, right? With two guests.
joining us right now above me, in the square directly above me, we've got Sabreena Merchant. She is covering the Lakers for Silver Screen and Roll. What other outlets? I see you sometimes writing for other places. Are you currently writing for anywhere else, or is it right now mainly Silver Screen and Roll?
I'm at SB Nation, so I cover the Clippers for them, and now I'm moved over to the Lakers. So.
What was it like covering that choke job? Really quick before we get to Shahan.
For the first couple days, I was just really disappointed that they were depriving me of days off. And then, I don't even know how to explain it. It just felt so very Clippers, you know?
Like, especially 3 times in a row, this keeps happening. Like that is as Clippery a thing as you would ever predict happening if you're somebody who really buys into the whole Clippers going to clip thing.
Yeah.
And this felt like a season where the Clippers were not going to clip. But man, like Shahan Ahmed joining us as well, NBCLA.com, among other outlets. When you were watching this, what was your takeaway? Like, as you know, the Clippers are up 3-1. It feels like we're finally going to have this hallowed Battle of LA, even in Orlando, and it doesn't take place.
I really wanted it to happen because I thought it would be, like we saw tonight, the Nuggets are not necessarily a good matchup for the Lakers, but the Clippers are. So I just wanted a really, really good series. And honestly, going into Game 7, I said the Clippers needed a double-digit lead going into the fourth quarter, and they needed to muzzle Jamal Murray because that's what he does. He just gets hot and starts draining threes late. And when it was a tie ball game, I was like, this game's over. It was like start of the third quarter, I'd already given up on the Clippers going and making it through because the previous 2 games, we'd seen it. It was like over and over again. We know what the Nuggets are going to do. And then lo and behold, because the Clippers weren't up by 15, 20 points, the Nuggets end up winning by 20 points. So it was sadly predictable. But yeah, I just remembered back to the last time it happened, which I happened to be covering when the Rockets did it to them. I was like, oh, yeah, I didn't think they were going to lose that series, but
that was insane.
No injuries, nothing to blame. There was no like Chris Paul hamstring or something happening. I was like, no, they just and there is a little bit where it's like, okay, Game 7, Kawhi and PG were not good, and it was a bit of a choke job in Game 7. But Game 6, they were good. Just like nobody else showed up, and like they had a few different times where it's like that series. Yeah, the Clippers had more than enough chances, and as much as like the Clippers crumbled, like Nuggets played their role. Jokic was out of his goddamn mind, and Jamal Murray was like insane late.
That's really interesting though, because one of the things that happened. Brian, you're back now. You can hear us.
I think so. I can hear you.
One of the things that I thought was really interesting about this game tonight, and the way the Lakers in particular controlled it, was their ability to keep both Jokic and Murray off the floor and like really drawing them a lot into foul troubles, bothering them a lot into fouls. Dwight Howard, who ended up, I don't want to say necessarily the unexpected spark in this game, just because the matchup played a little bit better or certainly much better for him than it did in Houston when he didn't play at all. But immediately Dwight made that presence felt, and Sabreena, he actually drew Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic's third foul for both of them. He played a role in keeping both those guys, on the bench. And if you're going to try to disrupt Denver's offense and what they do, I highly recommend keep their 2 best players off the floor for as much as possible.
Yeah, it's funny. Even before Jokic actually drew the fouls, Dwight actually drew the fouls on Jokic, you could tell that he was just getting in his face and really annoying him. And that's the kind of thing that nobody on the Clippers did. Like, he was just comfortable the entire series. And Dwight, really good antagonist. I mean, I'm not sure that that's what we would have.
When he drew the fourth,
like, for a positive force.
in the third quarter, he drew that fourth foul, and it probably could have been like a fifth called right after it. Like, he was just bullying Jokic around. I mean, I don't know if it'll last, but it worked. It worked real well tonight. I mean, Dwight had a ton of energy, Sabreena, that I don't know. I guess that happens when you play 5 minutes in the series before.
Yeah, it's load management, right? Isn't that what this whole process is about?
Yeah,
I don't think Dwight would have framed it that way, but I mean, hey, Shahan, what were you expect? Were you expecting, Dwight, or I guess JaVale too, who did end up starting the game, didn't play in the second half until basically everything was decided. But were you coming into this thinking that, like, okay, these guys, because the way Denver's roster is constructed and they have more size, I mean, you knew that they would play, but were you figuring that they would have this type of impact?
Well, I mean, JaVale didn't really have much of an impact and got in foul trouble quick, right? So I'm kind of in the air on whether or not you start Dwight in game 2. I think it might, JaVale started the whole season, like, minus last series, obviously. So I feel like there's some just consistency in still putting him out there. And if he gets another couple fouls quick, all right, you pull him out and don't play him the second half. It's not really a big loss. But with Dwight, okay, so Dwight is one of those really interesting people, and I'm sure you guys have noticed, where seemingly he can go on the floor and, like tonight, draw like 5 fouls in 5 minutes, or he can get 5 fouls in 5 minutes. Like, everything he does could be called either way. And tonight he was getting the benefit of the doubt in the sense that I think he was making that happen. He makes the referees.
That's the big thing. It's like, because I know Denver fans are and hey, look, I mean, it got a lot of attention. Shahan, you before we were talking, you pointed out that the foul discrepancy in the second quarter was a little cray. The Lakers shot 24 free throws in the second quarter. They drew, what was it, 16 fouls?
24 free throws, yeah.
Yeah, 24 free throws in the second quarter. They drew 16 fouls. Denver had in one quarter. I mean, that's insane. 16 fouls in one quarter. And so, but that's because the Lakers were moving, and then, they were the more aggressive team. And like Dwight kind of like represented all of that and how much more aggressive the Lakers were than Denver in that, that 17-1 run, especially. I just think like the starting thing, maybe you guys disagree. I almost think it doesn't matter at this point. Like, the Lakers have clearly set something up where all that really matters is LeBron is on the floor and AD is on the floor, and the other 3 guys seem to mix and match. They started the second half with Dwight, and it was fine. They switched over to Markieff Morris in the last series. It was fine. The other parts in this whole machine are completely interchangeable in that way.
Yeah,
I mean, I think they're interchangeable in the sense that they've got a bunch of different options. But I mean, obviously, you have to make sure that you're coming up with the right combinations, because something we talked about.
I just mean you don't have to worry about the people that you're subbing in and out. Like, you got to make sure that the parts line up, but like, you don't have to worry about hurting KCP's feelings if you decide that Caruso should start a half. That's all I'm getting at.
I mean, the fans spend enough time hurting KCP's feelings at the beginling of the season, so there's not really anything Vogel can do to him.
You want to worry about Rich Paul's feelings, not KCP.
Well, he's got a 2-year deal now.
Morris started last series.
Maybe it's why THT got those minutes against Houston.
Maybe you're saying maybe.
Well, they did need some wings. They needed some wings, and
he played well when he got in there.
He did play well. He did. I don't think it's purely clutch. He actually played well. I frankly was disappointed that THT wasn't freed tonight.
Well, yeah, why was he unavailable tonight? They just decided to switch things around and give JR the active slot.
You said it before, Sabreena. Load management.
Oh, okay, right.
You got to keep these guys fresh as they go on. I always wonder, like, if you're the dude. I mean, nobody is going to say no in this context, but like, does JR want to get out and play the 4 minutes of garbage time? Like, did JaVale want to get out on the floor? I mean, sometimes I know coaches will ask the veteran players, "Do you want to go?"
That's what you get a ring for doing that, Brian. That's literally.
I mean, JR took.
You get to like Dudley's age and stuff. You don't always want to get off the bench if you've been sitting that long.
Jared Dudley always wants to get off the bench.
You can pull a hammy.
No, I don't think Jared's moving quick enough to pull a hammy.
I just think his age, not the person.
Yeah, I'm not worried about it. I don't think Dudley is actually moving much faster on the court than he actually is on the bench. Like, it's all sort of a steady pace. To answer your other question, JR put up 2 shots in 4 minutes. Yeah, he wanted to be out there.
That's true.
We got that.
And it's worth pointing out he made one of them.
He made the Lakers Twitter account highlight feed too, because it's important.
Shout out to your jersey there, Shahan.
Yeah, Zeno. You guys know Zeno.
Yeah.
No, this is actually a random France Zidane jersey in red. You never see France red jerseys, but I was telling these guys earlier, I bought this like on a random street in like Rio, maybe like 11 or 12 years ago, because I was like, that's never seen that before. So Zeno, this is a
bootleg.
And you can tell it's at least 2 years old because there's only 1 star.
There you go.
You guys know a lot about
somebody's paying attention.
Tremendous amount of soccer jerseys. So let's talk about this a little bit, because you guys, we pointed out the foul discrepancy. We pointed out, their stars were. I mean, the Lakers have the 2 best players in this series, as good as Jokic is and as good as Murray is.
In the playoffs, left for sure.
For sure. And so, especially if AD is going to be doing what he did tonight.
Tatum's the only one you would even make an argument for, but I would take. What's that?
Jokic.
Not Butler?
Well, no, Jimmy Butler's an incredible player, and I am like a secret stan. You can actually go through my Twitter account, and going back to like 2014, I've been like, trade everyone for Jimmy Butler. But like, Butler is in this role and what he's been doing, he's not going to drop 40 on you. He's not going to, like, he's a team player. He plays incredible on both ends. I love him. But AD and LeBron as individuals are like 2 standout players. Like they by themselves are doing everything, like, genuinely.
They complement each other so incredibly well. I mean, like, we haven't seen anything in this city like since Kobe and Powell. I mean, like, when you look at just 2 guys whose skill sets are so good together. Because I mean, LeBron can be any position you want him to be, but for all intents and purposes, he's a guard. But when you've got AD who can also play in the high post, out at the arc, and you can just put either one of these guys anywhere you want on the court. I mean, like, even with Jokic's ability to play, out in space or towards the arc, like, Jamal Murray has less utility the closer you get into the basket, unless he's driving to the basket. Like, you're not going to post up Jamal Murray and have the offense run through him. But like AD and LeBron, you can just do whatever you want with either one of these guys. And there's nobody left in the playoffs. There aren't that many teams like that, period, where you've got that type of versatility with your 2 stars.
Well, AD, where did AD finish in the MVP voting? It was 4th?
6th.
Okay, so like you have number 4, you have 2, and you have 6. Obviously, all the guys in between are gone. But it is kind of an interesting question, like who when you look at this, and obviously it's game 1. The series isn't over, but the Lakers are heavily favored to get out of this one. And you try to project ahead to what could happen in the Eastern Conference in a sport where the talent dictates and the elite talent really dictates. To have the 2 best players that are left, if the Lakers don't win a title this year, it becomes a pretty massive disappointment, correct?
Yeah.
I mean, we've reached that point.
I mean, the good news is, I mean, you guys, Sabreena, I know. I just needed to make sure everybody saw that.
Oh, I saw it.
Yeah, no, it's very important. I wasn't going to be the one to verbalize it. I was hoping somebody else would. But now that the Statham thing was verbalized, thank you. But like,
you can put your burner phone away now.
my burner commenter phone. Yeah. I mean, you guys can both weigh in, but
Andy has them. They use them for very different purposes.
I don't picture the idea of them being now I think the heavy favorite to win this thing and the expectations. That's not something that's going to bother this team. I mean, I think it's what they saw themselves as anyway, and they're led by a guy who at this point there's really no such thing as pressure for with LeBron. I mean, like, and there's enough experience there that I don't think it's necessarily going to matter. Like, yeah, the disappointment will be there, but I don't think it's actually going to be something.
I don't mean that I just mean it in like in reevaluating where this thing was 3 or 4 weeks ago versus where it is now. It's like we've reached a place where the Lakers really should win a championship just based on having LeBron. I mean, and I love what Miami's doing. I keep talking about like Boston potentially being a better or a more challenging matchup if Hayward comes back and they have a little bit more top end talent, whatever it might be. And I think we're just sort of, Dragic is really good, and Bam Adebayo just isn't at a place where people think of him as a star, but he kind of is. And obviously Jimmy Butler is awesome, but like it's nobody has anybody close because Jokic is a great offensive player, but he's not that good defensively. He's not AD. And Jamal Murray is just ascending to that place where you can even kind of talk about him in this context. Before the playoffs, nobody was. So like this opportunity that's in front of them, Sabreena, it really doesn't get more wide open in a playoffs than where the Lakers are right now. I mean, it's as available as a title gets.
Yeah, I just hate to think of it in that respect because it's I don't want to disrespect the basketball gods,
Well, right, I know.
But yeah, I mean,
Ryan has no rooting interest, so he doesn't care.
Yeah. The Lakers had the two best players.
I'm a basketball atheist in that way.
Of course. Always the vibe I've gotten from the two of you. Yeah, I mean, I think they had the two best players coming in. There was some debate about like Anthony Davis versus Kawhi or like Giannis, but just the fit between the two of them is so much more perfect than any other superstar duo. I mean, I think, Jokic and Murray obviously complement each other very well. They're just not at the same talent level, like not even near what LeBron and AD are. So, yeah, I mean, I guess they have the path laid out for them. They've done so well with this very measured approach so far that I hate to look ahead.
Well, I mean, some of Fight Club, Shahan. Don't talk about Fight Club. It's the first rule of Fight Club. Do not talk about Fight Club.
I mean, some of the way they complemented so well, Shahan, and you were around covering this era as well. Like Kobe and Pau ended up, even though their personalities were really different, they ended up really compatible personality-wise as teammates. Like there were very few players of Pau's caliber that I think would have been able to handle everything that comes being Kobe's number two than him. I mean, I think he actually was perfect. And LeBron and AD seem a lot like that, like in the sense that, AD is that natural fall in place guy with LeBron, and stuff like that matters. It's important.
Yeah. I mean, Pau and Kobe is such a weird thing because Kobe was just kind of like an asshole in many ways. They're both incredibly smart basketball wise. Like they're geniuses when it comes to understanding what's going on in the game. But Pau was like the nicest human being possibly I've ever encountered, not just in the NBA, like period. And Kobe was like as great as he was, and as like when he was in that maniacal mode, he did not give an F about anybody. And like Pau and him just worked so well together because I think they had the basketball understanding together. And I think losing that first finals together kind of helped Kobe kind of drag Pau along and make him the tougher person even on the basketball court, even though Pau couldn't help but be the nicest guy off the court no matter what happened. So I think there was some compatibility there just because it positionally also it made sense. They just ran the pick and roll together and they worked together on the court so directly, same way Murray and Jokic do. And a lot of times LeBron and AD, even though not that much in the playoffs, to be honest with you. But especially because playoff Rondo showed up, so they don't really do that much. But I think the compatibility is more like LeBron has just been
going in.
Yeah, I think LeBron's just been like the central focus of being the star and having the pressure on him for his entire career to the point where it's like so normal for him to be in the conference finals, to be in the finals, to be going for a title. Even if he doesn't win the title, he's on that stage to such a degree. And AD hasn't been there, So he kind of seemingly looks to LeBron, and LeBron's kind of his like mentor, even though, and I know people will argue with me on this, and I know LeBron was like, "Hey, I can't believe I only got 16 votes." I would argue AD was possibly the MVP of the team in the regular season. In the playoffs, there's no question. LeBron's been the best player of the playoffs in my mind. Like no one's even close. But in the regular season, AD was like a defensive, ridiculous monster. Led the team in scoring, rebounds, steals, blocks. LeBron got him on assists, and as much as he was the leader of the team, like AD was doing everything. So I understand, I understand that AD in many ways on the court is doing a lot of what LeBron used to do. And I think mentally he looks to LeBron, and that's the compatibility is LeBron provides him that guidance of, hey, you haven't been at this level. I'm used to this level. Look to me and I'll follow. Like lead by example, but also verbally. It's not just by example. He's seemingly in his ear about everything.
So, but Andy, I think it's a really good comparison based on who they, in terms of how the two stars fit together. And, we spent a lot of the preseason talking about, is this the best teammate that LeBron has ever had, despite, whether it's Dwayne Wade or Kyrie or Kevin Love or whoever it might be. But the biggest thing is that it was easily the cleanest fit of any superstar he's played with. We spent less time, talking about the way that, AD had never played with anybody even close to LeBron. And the difference is between Kobe
Except
and
playoff Rondo.
Except playoff Rondo. The difference between Kobe and Pau and LeBron and
AD.
in AD is that LeBron is, I think, overall, just is a better player than Kobe, and AD is better than Pau. So, like, you have, you can certainly argue that both guys are better than the other part of that combination that won them 2 titles. And so when you start to see it in the playoffs, like Kobe could elevate Pau, but he wasn't generally elevating the 37 and 10 or 40-point games and stuff like that, in part because Kobe was taking a lot of those shots. I get that, but I think that's what can make it, now that you see it in action, I think what can make this tandem so special.
Yeah, I mean, they're perfectly matched for each other. I mean, they very obviously.
I'm worried about my safety because I said something about Kobe. Like,
well, did you? Is Dwight Howard
that noise coming out of the bottom left of the screen? I was like, oh, Shahan's worried about me.
No, I was going to ask. So does that make Dwight Howard Andrew Bynum, or like how does this work out? Who is Bynum?
Who's Odom?
Ooh, that's interesting. Who would be Odom on this team?
Playoff Rondo. Come on. Playoff Rondo.
The comparison, there is the right era to compare this to is the three-peat team.
Yeah,
where there was no real third guy in that way. You don't go back to those teams. But
well, I mean, I was going to say if you were going to try to break it down the way it was with Kobe, Pau, Drew, LO, those guys, you would probably say that Kuzma was LO. Because people used to complain all the time with Lamar that you didn't always know what you were going to get. There would be times offensively that he would sort of inexplicably disappear, but there were a lot of different things he could do. And Lamar's defense was always so underrated with those teams. And Kuzma, I mean, his defense, I wouldn't say now is underrated just because people are actually talking about it because it's not something, Sabreena, that was ever expected from him, or I guess anticipated from him. People were actually asking for it. It just wasn't happening. So, I mean, that's been a really interesting thing with Kuzma in these playoffs because he clearly showed up with a really, good mindset. And it sounded like he had put in a lot of work during the stoppage. And, he said that this felt like the closest thing he had actually had to a training camp. But it hasn't consistently translated in the type of offense that everyone thought the Lakers would need from Kuzma in order to really elevate themselves. But he also is playing defense with an effectiveness and a versatility that nobody anticipated, but actually has been valuable enough to keep him on the court.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's enough good things you can say about Kuz right now because, like you said, this was kind of his training camp, right? He was injured with Team USA heading into the start of the season, so he was just behind the 8 ball the entire time, and this is an entirely different team than the one he played with last year, LeBron James or not. So it's been really cool to see him just healthy and like able to do his thing. The one thing I love about Kuzma that he always moves on offense. He's always cutting.
Yeah.
Like that was supremely important in the Houston series because that team gets stagnant and then the Lakers sort of just get stagnant watching them. And Kuz was like one of the guys who actually consistently made sure that something was always happening. I don't exactly know what kind of role he's going to have in this particular series. Like, I'm not sure anything he did today really stood out to me. A lot of people are bringing up like the Kuzma Michael Porter comparison because they're sort of the X factors off the bench, and neither of them are really good during the competitive portion of the game. Obviously, Porter tacked on a bunch of garbage stats, but I mean, he's not a negative on defense, which is miles above what we ever thought was going to happen, right?
Well, it's also miles above Porter.
Exactly, miles above Porter. Although Porter rebounds the ball, which is always a good thing to have. But yeah, I mean, he's super confident in this role player, niche that he settled into, which is not always easy for guys to subsume themselves to like something that they think is less than what they're capable of, right? Because Kuz has made it very loud that like I'd be starting on any other team in the league. I only come off the bench because we have LeBron James and Anthony Davis. And whether that's true or not, the fact that his like ego is in check, that he's able to do just what the team needs from him is pretty cool because he's still a very young guy.
That's actually, Shahan, what I was going to mention. Like, it's unusual to see guys willing to subjugate their talent when they're actually looking ahead to their first big deal. Like, and maybe this is something that would help Kuzma reputationally, but if his next deal is dependent on counting stats, this isn't helping.
Winning a title helps more. I'm sorry, Shahan, go on.
What?
I just co-opted an answer. I was fired up by the question. Sorry.
Oh no, go for it, Brian. Please, you have an answer.
But it's a fascinating question. Like, where does Kuzma do better? Putting up big numbers somewhere like and not winning, or doing this, showing he can play defense and either getting paid by the Lakers or leaving and going somewhere else. Like, I don't think this costs him money at all. I think winning a title and showing he can play defense makes him money. Maybe you disagree, Shahan?
No, I think he's shown that he can score and he's a volume scorer. He always that's kind of his MO. So I think if you give him enough shots, he'll put up points. We all know that. I think showing the defense is definitely something else. And I think something to keep in mind is, Kuz has been getting paid since college. So like the money's there. Sorry, I just had to. I just remember that press conference was like the funniest thing ever. But
yeah.
Right, he was like, okay, so that's what they wrote. Like, didn't deny it at all. Was just like, yeah, well, that's what they're. What did they say? Well, that's what they said. It was like, okay, then we're all on the same page. It was
a strong denial in a classic sense.
Oh, it was great. But no, I think I think a lot of it is actually culturally a little bit beyond Kuz, in the sense that you look at a guy like Dwight Howard is a good example. He came in on a non-guaranteed deal for making pennies. I know you can look at his career earnings and where he is versus Kuz, completely different spots. But Dwight is essentially playing for his career, right? He's playing for his next deal as well. And he literally sat out the entire series minus 5 minutes. So if you have guys buying in like that who are vets on the team, and then you also have guys like LeBron and AD obviously at the front of the line, I think you got to fall into place or you're going to be put in your place. And behind closed doors, maybe he was put in his place. I don't know. That happens in the locker room. But whatever it was, whether it was him on his own or whether it was the team as a whole, I think he's more than accepted his role and who he's playing with, and understands, where he fits into this championship run. Because, like Sabreena mentioned earlier, or Andy or Brian, or really all of us, this team not winning the title would be a surprise at this point. Like, this is their title to lose. And once the Clippers got knocked out, a bunch of Laker fans and everybody were like kind of jumping for joy and doing cartwheels and stuff. Well, as much as they were doing cartwheels for the Clippers collapse, they were secretly, in my mind, doing cartwheels because they were like, thank God we don't have to play the Clippers anymore. Because that series would have been 6 or 7 games, and who knows which way it goes.
Do you agree, Sabreena, like, given how the Clippers were playing, do you think the Lakers and the Clippers still would have been the 7-game series that everybody expected?
I mean, the Clippers got up to play the Lakers every single time this season, and they did not get up in the majority of their other 60 so games. So there was definitely a level of intensity that you saw in those matchups that was just not present. I think that would have been the case again in the playoffs. You never want to mess with that much talent, even if they did, do their very Clippers things in the last series.
Well, this is an interesting question because this is something Brian and I were talking about, I think, on the eve of that Clippers collapse. There had been a lot of benefit of the doubt given to that team for their, I guess, assumed ability to just flip the switch when they needed to. Because all year, they've been inconsistent. There's been this assumption of a higher gear that they could get to. And once they had everybody healthy, once they had everyone on the same page, it was supposed to be happening in the bubble, and it didn't for various reasons, involving family tragedies and lemon pepper wings and all that stuff. But it's unusual to see a team with no history at all get that type of benefit of the doubt. Honestly, I'm not saying the Lakers have been disrespected this year because they haven't. People have acknowledged they've been a great team all year.
You're not buying the whole "we believe" meme that's going around.
I wanted to continue because it's really hilarious. But
it's Lakers,
but
right?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Nobody's disrespecting the Lakers, but I will say this: the Clippers had gotten much more of a benefit of the doubt that they would have an ability, Sabreena, to flip a switch and reach a higher gear than the Lakers, despite not showing that higher gear as consistently, I think, this season as the Lakers had, which again is unusual just because the Clippers have no history of doing it. And I have been wondering lately if all of us just sort of fell into a trap with them, and how much of that is really just Kawhi being there. And we see Kawhi as this giant killer.
I think it's because they hit the checkpoints, they won free agency, right? They get Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, and it's this gigantic coup that they end up with Paul George because nobody saw that coming, right? And then they beat the Lakers on opening night.
It's sort of his thing to turn down the Lakers. Maybe we should have seen it coming.
And then they beat the Lakers on opening night without Paul George, right? So that's, checkpoint number 2. Then they beat the Lakers on Christmas in that comeback game, right? So all of the big, national, everybody's eyes are on you games, they showed up, they won, and then they go into the bubble winning 8 of their last 9, wrecking the Rockets and the Nuggets along the way. So that was sort of the last impression they had left on anybody, right? So yeah, in between, there was obviously a lot of nonsense that the Clippers were putting themselves through on their fans, right? But they hit the checkpoints. They got all those major benchmarks. And when you can't follow a team, that closely for 60 or so games, that's what you remember.
And it also kind of, it flipped the script in a really interesting way that I think people like, which is, the big bad Lakers and all that now are, have a real challenge. And from look, it's not like they're going to suck forever and they're not going to be good again next year. And, the same conversations are going to happen. Steve Ballmer is a really good owner. They're run by really smart people. They have a good roster that they can fix. But the storyline, and it was so absurd. And then, like you say, Andy, the way they played all year long, streetlights versus spotlights and all that, they were the streetlightier team, or the spotlightier team. The Lakers were super grindy, incredible defense all year long. The
Clippers had 2 stars force their way to them this year, as opposed to the Lakers, who only had 1 star who forced their way to them. So, if anything, like you said, Brian, they're the more spotlighty team. You can't look at.
There was no drama. There was nothing around this team that was even kind of Hollywood, really, other than LeBron, literally making movies and putting Space Jam together. There was no Hollywood.
I will say, okay, there was no Hollywood drama this season, but the way Luke kind of was shoved out slowly last year, and LeBron was kind of bum about the way that whole thing happened was kind of dramatic.
Well, there was some drama the previous season. I think
leading into this, there was a slight bit of drama to get to this point.
There was a lot.
The fact that the Laker kids were all just bye-bye, little bit of drama there.
I think that LeBron publicly taking up more for Anthony Davis wanting to leave than his players who were twisting in the wind during the rumor mill. That didn't help.
Yeah, the Ty Lue thing, a little bit of drama there. Jason Kidd basically like, hey, we want this guy, but the whole domestic violence thing, let's make him an assistant instead. The way that was kind of getting leaked out, like leading into it, I think
the expectation was that it was going to be a lot, and it has been zero. There's been none of it.
Dwight Howard's the best example. Again, I hate to keep going back to the guy, but he's the best example. Everybody thought it was going to be nothing but drama with Dwight, and apart from a few apart from a few comments here and there that everybody kind of goes like rolls their eyes at, not really too much going on there, like not too dramatic. And on that topic, I think mid-season or something, I remember being like, the Lakers have 3 Hall of Famers. And today, I think I was reminded, no, they probably actually have 4, and all 4 of them played pretty damn well today. Because if they win another title, I was saying possibly Rondo might be that 4. Like if they win another title, you look at his numbers and look at his All-Stars, you look at, he would make an argument. I don't think he necessarily gets in, but Dwight, I think, definitely gets in. And
Dwight's definitely in.
Gimme.
If playoff Rondo continues like this and plays this type of role, even though it ultimately ends up looking like a cakewalk in many ways, does that not help him get over the top? Possibly
it does. But we've had this debate. We've had I forget, Andy, who was the guest we actually went into these. Was it Ben Lyons where we went into the
I think it was
stats? Like he's got a lot of ground to make up, like a lot. So
I mean, he's basically taken off like the last 6 regular seasons, right?
Yeah. He's just a playoff Hall of Fame, like just the playoffs.
The reason I bring it up is he passed Michael Jordan in assists tonight, right? Like being top 10 in the playoffs in assists, that's nothing to scoff at. Like that's pretty legitimate. You can throw a couple of titles on that, and it rolls on
career.
There's a big gulf between shitty
I'm not turning him into Mike Penberthy or something like that.
Hey, Penberthy's a champion, all right?
Easy.
It's the first name that I could come up with.
2001 NBA champion Mike Penberthy to you. Thank you.
Quick question. I think the answer to this one from the Roberto Jones, is it too early to ask about how the Heat and Lakers match up? It's too early to ask Sabreena. She's not going to answer that question. She does not believe in tempting the gods.
Yes, way too early. Way too early. That every game in that series is a coin flip. Every game.
I mean, Miami seems to be handling those coins flying through the air.
They got Jimmy Buckets, man. Jimmy Buckets likes to win. That's all he cares about.
Coffee Baron?
Big face coffee.
He had.
Go on.
I was gonna say Jimmy Buckets in game 2, and he was making defensive play after defensive play. But of the 5 Miami Heat starters, had the fewest field goal attempts. A guy who can drop 30 in his sleep does not care about scoring. Like that embodies what Jimmy Buckets is and what that team is. And I go back to, yes, he's playing out of his mind. Miami's awesome. Like they're a really fun team to watch. I like them a lot. I like them to possibly win that series. But right now, game 3, they're talking about Hayward coming back. I'm not sure that helps or hurts the Celtics, but I still think that either way, like every game so far has been a 2 to 4 point game in the last couple of minutes. It's not going to change. Both those teams play too good a defense. Both those teams can hit big shots. I think that series could go 4 games. It could go 7 games. Like just depends on who executes in the last couple of minutes.
So what you're saying is any number of games. It's a really strong prediction you're making there, Shahan.
I'm saying it's too early.
Anywhere from 4 to 7 games.
I'm saying it's too early to
say tough stand you're taking.
I'm making a very strong, putting a line in the sand. Do not say Heat Lakers yet. You can say Lakers versus Heat / Celtics. Even that might be a little premature because game 2 we'll see what happens. But I think, I really went on the limb.
Are you willing to commit with the first team? Are you willing to commit, Shahan, that the first team in the Eastern Conference that gets to 4 wins will make the finals? Are you?
No, it's too early to say. It's too early, Brian. We can't do that yet.
This is fun. Anything that from 702 Racing Nut, literally anything that hurts the Celtics is fun for me. I gotta say, these last 96 hours or whatever have been awesome for Laker fans. Like, this has been about as great as it's been for Laker fans watching the Clippers get eliminated and the Celtics go down 0-2 without the Lakers actually winning anything of substance. I mean, they only played one game during this whole period that Laker fans have been like so incredibly excited. And the Lakers themselves have had very little to do with it in the grand scheme of things.
I have a question for you guys. Who's a better matchup for the Lakers in the finals?
Okay.
Coming into the bubble,
Sabrina, would you like to sit this one out?
No, I'll do this. Coming into the bubble, I would have said Miami for sure. Boston gave the Lakers some real trouble, especially at that game in the Garden. But
Another Rondo game. Game winner Rondo.
Oh, that was last year.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
God, Rondo's been
This year and last year seemed like the equally long time ago. So
I think Miami is a tougher matchup because of Spoelstra.
He's a really good coach. Yes, he knows LeBron really well. He's just a really good coach, period. I also think, too, like, Miami can play so many different ways, you know, and like they've got a lot of shooters to cover, but also Bam is such a weird, unusual player to be accounting for, and sort of what they do with him. I think
you can put him. He's one of the rare guys in the league who can guard LeBron and AD.
Yeah,
you put Jimmy on LeBron, right? And Bam on AD.
You probably a lot, but I'm saying Bam can pick up both the guys, which is just.
I assume Crowder would start on one or the other, actually.
Yeah, I would think Crowder would start on LeBron, just to take some of that pressure off Bam, and Jimmy with just picking up fouls. I mean, both of them will eventually end up both on LeBron and AD, but at the outset, I would say it would be Crowder on LeBron.
I just think Miami is
before we get too deep into this. I was just saying before we get too deep into this, because we want to talk about the MVP thing too. From a Lakers fan perspective, do you think more Lakers fans would satisfaction in winning the championship by beating the Clippers and the Celtics and like take the risk of losing, or just like the glidier path supposedly with avoiding both teams? On the other hand,
Sabrina just said Miami's the tougher matchup.
But you're
apparently Brian does not agree with that.
Most people would have said Boston at least before. Like, do you want it? But you also risk something losing to Boston that you don't risk losing to Miami. Like, losing to Boston sucks way more. Losing to Miami sucks. Losing to Boston really sucks. There's a bigger risk if you play Boston, but there's a bigger satisfaction. There's a bigger risk if you play the Clippers, but there's a bigger satisfaction.
I think at this point, you take the gladiator path. It's been 10 years. Gladiator path is fine. It's 17, regardless of who it comes against.
The bubble is also, I think, such a specific setting that a lot of that stuff you end up throwing out the window anyway, because some of what makes it so tough, at least in theory, is having to go to these other buildings. And if you don't end up having to do that anyway, I think some of the ways we traditionally think about that go out the window anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. People are with you.
Sabrina's got her burner account going.
Yep, that's the one.
Okay, this is to me what I think what sort of makes that, again. The Lakers are only up 1-0, but they were the favorite heading into this series, and honestly, I think they're the better team, and I've already been out, publicly predicting them to win the series anyway. But when you look at the potential finals matchup, on one hand, you've got LeBron going up against his former team, and perhaps they'd end up going against the harder team of the two remaining in the East. But, there's a lot of drama and storyline that comes with that. But then the flip side is if you go up against Boston,
it's Rondo. It's Rondo time.
It is Rondo time. Rondo revenge game, which, by the way, for Rondo, I think is every game he ever plays.
Only in the playoffs.
But you've got the 10-year anniversary of the last time the Lakers won a championship, which was against Boston, but also involving Kobe. And, I mean, these guys have all outwardly said that Kobe is a big part of what's driving them through all of this. So there's the emotion of, having that 10-year anniversary going up against the actual team that, beyond the rivalry that exists with the Lakers anyway, you've got the team that Kobe last faced. So I think there's a lot going on with either one of them.
Oh, yeah, that storylines, I mean, beyond the Kobe patch on their jerseys, they'd be playing against Tatum, who's outwardly said his favorite player is Kobe as well. There's just so much swirling there that it would be, I think the best storyline, obviously, and ratings and everybody who's a complete neutral would root for Boston. But I think from what we've seen with the celebrations on the Clippers collapse, I think Laker fans would welcome not facing Boston and facing Miami. I think the glidier path, as Brian put it. But yeah, I personally I would welcome a Boston series because I just want to see Marcus Smart versus Alex Caruso chasing down loose balls and see who gets to it.
That would be fun.
I think like that would genuinely be like that would be the series for me. I would just every like third play, if I was coach, I'd be like, just throw it at half court and let's see who gets there. Like, let's see what happens.
All kidding aside, there are a lot worse things, Sabreena, that Caruso could aspire to be in terms of trying to model the career that he wants to turn into than Marcus Smart.
Yeah, I mean, he's a lottery pick, right? So it's a good place to start anyway. But the Caruso like national appreciation train is probably my favorite storyline of the playoffs. I mean, I was just reading a story in the Wall Street Journal this morning about how Caruso is the LeBron James of playing with LeBron James because he's literally the best like teammate in terms of rating to ever score with LeBron. It's fantastic. I mean, we saw this like 2017 Summer League, that super fun Laker team that beat Portland, because Caruso stepped in for Lonzo and won that title for them. It's really gratifying to see him succeed on his very first postseason run, which is not something that everyone is capable of. I mean, I have like Ramon Sessions PTSD quite a bit.
Oh, you mean Ramon Sessions who didn't cure everything by coming in right before the playoffs?
I remember it was so funny. Kobe talking about how when they got Ramon, how about he was really excited to be playing off ball. Like, he's really excited to have somebody else who could handle the ball and take some of that pressure off him. That lasted for like a week and a half. And then Ramon was just off.
I don't know if it lasted that long.
Yeah, that's being generous.
I'm counting the whole week and a half, like some of the off days they had as well. Like some of the days they weren't actually playing. But like, it was so funny because like, I think in Kobe's mind, every second that he didn't have the ball, even like when he was posting up to get it back, in Kobe's mind, that was playing off ball. Like he had a very different definition of playing off ball than it is conventionally defined. But you're right, Sabreena. The Ramon Sessions pick and roll era that was supposed to juice the Lakers for that, I think it was 2012 playoff run, did not happen at all.
Right. And it's kind of cool to see like KCP and Caruso. I think KCP's been in the playoffs before, actually, once with Detroit, but like if I remember correctly, that was like a LeBron James sweep, right? So it's like not really a playoff series. So yeah, this is basically their first run at it. And they've, other than that first game against Portland where everybody looked very, very off, they've all been ready for the moment, which is really cool. And it's nice that Caruso's not just our like lovable Laker anymore. He's a legitimately good player who's just makes good things happen every time he comes onto the court. Like LeBron's best minutes, I think, were with Caruso today. He had a couple dunks off of Caruso.
Of course they were with Caruso. But like, I mean, obviously, Alex Caruso is not the best player LeBron James has ever played with. Okay, fine.
Somewhere in there.
That obvious, but I love the fact that the analytics say that the combination is as good as LeBron's ever had. Like that to me is just spectacular, and it validates Caruso and like what guys like him can do. And I think important, like, and it on a day when we're sort of arguing about what criteria make the MVP and like what you're supposed to vote in LeBron, if you haven't heard it by now, you will by the morning, kind of breaking down how voting doesn't always make sense. And I think, look, we've learned that as a country. It doesn't apply just to sport. Voting doesn't always work. But like, he's right. I mean, we switch off. We go by storyline. We go some years by numbers. Some years, but like when you can plug in numbers that say Alex Caruso and LeBron James are like the most dominant combination in the NBA, it elevates Caruso in a way that I think is awesome and deserved. And there are other guys that are kind of like that just are winning. I sound like Jeff Van Gundy, winning basketball players.
He plays defense. He knows where he fits in. He doesn't force it. He's like, very rarely are you going to see Alex Caruso dribble, like go one-on-one, pull up and take a three. He's more the guy, like he does the subtle things, right? When the ball gets rotated to him, rather than just moving it on, he might take a dribble just to tilt the defense a little bit, then move it on. He just does those like minor small plays. And like today, he was pretty good. He had a couple and ones, and he got in when the Lakers were. That first quarter was pretty nuts. I mean, both teams were scoring ridiculous, and it kind of KCP hit a couple of shots. Caruso, like some of the role players were actually doing their parts until the Lakers defense kind of picked up, and you could say the second quarter a lot of that was officiating. They kind of started calling it a lot tighter, and the Lakers were more aggressive, so they benefited from that significantly. I mean, yeah, I think Andy or Brian, I don't know who sent the tweet, but like having Jokic on the bench is probably a good defensive strategy. But add in Murray and Millsap also on the bench. When you have the three best starters, arguably or probably, sitting on the bench with 3 fouls apiece in the first half, yeah, that's pretty good defense. And I understand that. I fully understand the Nuggets. The fans. Them being upset with the officiating over that, because some of those, I think not to go back to officiating real quick, but I will. At the start of the third quarter, I think there were a couple plays where I went, yeah, this is a little silly, because I think I said before the show started, it was kind of like the Lakers were getting the home court playoff calls and we haven't seen that in the bubble really. This was like one of those games where it kind of happened that way. And I think the embodiment of it was early in the third quarter. You saw Jokic when he picked up his fourth foul was on Dwight, kind of going into him, and they're kind of touching arms, and he just kind of hits his arm out of the way because Dwight's going into him like this, and they call a foul. So on the next play, literally the next play, Jokic goes, and Anthony Davis runs full steam into him. He goes down, no call. They throw an alley-oop to Dwight in the back because Jokic is on the ground. And if you're a Nuggets fan, you're going, okay, so if you're like trying to hold your ground and you like are shoving back, you get called a foul. You stand your ground and you take the charge, you're not going to get a call. Like, what the hell are you supposed to do? So it was a little bit weird, but I think it was a throwback to home court officiating.
Well, AD did talk. He's been doing it the entire playoffs, where he actually falls back into we defended our home court. Yeah, he actually said that in the post-game TNT interview. Like
the refs are going to feel that exact same pressure when the series shifts back to virtual Denver, and right. The virtual Denver fans start getting all over them.
And the virtual altitude makes it hard.
Yeah, the altitude is really what's going to kill this series. Just virtual altitude. Can you imagine if they did that? Just like in the controlled environment, added the altitude just for.
That's quite a bubble.
I was thinking about like if there were ways that you could try to like truly replicate things like either altitude or like do something to try to make it harder for the visiting team on these neutral sites. Like I'm not smart enough to know if altitude can be replicated in the arena.
I think you get a little dicey there. You might have people with liquid in their lungs.
You'd have to use like Ultron, like to lift up the cities.
Well, that was one. I remember, Brian, you and I actually talked about this. I thought that like the visiting team against Denver, like every time they're going towards their basket, the court should elevate up slightly, like tilt up slightly. They should have to go up, uphill just slightly, a little bit, just to get tired out. Or Denver can feel like they're going downhill because they're used to that altitude. Like
in Utah, they racially abuse you on on every out of bounds play.
And there's also altitude there too.
Just kind of throw that in there, right?
I mean, look, if you really want to replicate it, these are the places you go. You have really hostile, awful people from virtual Utah, virtual Boston, those type of fans. I mean,
you bring back the fan who was banned for getting into it with Russell Westbrook. You just bring him back for the virtual crowd.
that's where I draw the line. I mean, I'm not bringing that guy back in. That guy deserves to be banned from virtual fandom. And, okay, this is a good suggestion. This is a very good suggestion. I think this is very practical. Ankle weights. When the Lakers go to virtual Denver, they have to play in ankle weights. Like these are the things you do.
I would say
a lot about Jokic.
I probably should have thought of this at the beginning of the playoffs rather than the end. But
well, I mean, unfortunately, I'm not convinced that we'll be out of the pandemic for next year's playoffs. So,
no, it's not looking good, fellas and lady. It's not looking good. I think I asked this, but you guys had moved on when I like popped in for the Tanya thing yesterday. How reasonable is it that next season will be in a bubble of sorts? Because I know MLS has moved out of the bubble. I know that everybody's kind of going back to that.
You can't do this for a season. You can't bubble for a season. You can do what the NFL is doing where, I think there's a decent chance that fans won't be in arenas. But I think teams will play in their home cities. I think they will fly. Maybe they reduce interconference play, and you just make a 65-game Western Conference and Eastern Conference schedule, which kind of makes the playoffs sort of intriguing. But you can't ask people to be away from their families like this for an entire season. It just won't work. Players won't agree.
So the thought process would be, right? You don't do it in that same way. You do it for 2-month stretch, essentially give them an all-star break to go home, be with their families, redo the whole testing thing and test them while they're away, bring them back for another couple of months, actually have the all-star break, send them back again, bring them back. Like basically do it back and forth, because baseball is a good example. You say they play in their home stands and everything, but now the playoffs are coming up and they're pretty much bubbling up for the playoffs. NFL, NFL doesn't care about anything. Frankly, they never have. But like they're having the few fans that they had in KC, like some of them tested positive. So like the non-bubble life is not necessarily looking all that great. So when you have something that has worked from a coronavirus standpoint, has worked perfectly. Like you have not had any positive tests that have been reported. I don't know, like for a month and a half.
They all hate it there. Like they all hate it there. The referees.
Oh, they do. But this is the one thing that I think
he loves it.
Jimmy Butler is the best, by the way. He literally. Did you guys see this interview? Did you see the interview where he said, "I am not inviting any guests because I'm just here to play basketball"? It's like, why would I invite somebody else to come here? I'm here. Like, I love that. Jimmy Butler is the best. But like
he may never leave the bubble. Like I think Jimmy Butler's gonna stay.
Hey, basketball's over. You can go now. I'm cool.
Well, think about a team like Toronto, though, right? Because NBA players, and this is something that you could really sell to the players union, because there are a lot of NBA players that play in states or countries that tax the hell out of you. Going to the bubble, you actually will make an extra $4, $5, $6 million because you're playing in Florida. No state tax in Florida. LeBron James, if he played a season in Florida rather than LA, guess what? That dude just made like $10 million. Like it is actually like staggering how much money economically you could sell a lot of the players on.
I have to admit, I did not think of that.
Michelle Roberts, give me a call.
Totally positive that works, but that's as good of a selling process.
Wait, Mohisi says that's not how the taxation process will work, though.
In the NBA, it is though. In the NBA, they literally they get taxed per game that they play in each state.
Right, and that's why they all complain about playing in Memphis. There's like a
tax based on the city of your employment.
It's true for most places, but the NBA and sporting is different. In the NBA, literally where you play the game, these guys have tax returns.
I don't know what it means if you they move where you play to somewhere else like that.
How do virtual?
Now we need to find out.
Virtual taxes work.
Like if you're playing in say virtual Milwaukee, you have to follow their tax system.
Virtual Milwaukee? No, you're not playing in Milwaukee. The way that it works is the reason that it's such a huge benefit is obviously all the home games are played in the home state. So those 41 games, you're guaranteed to pay no state income tax. but every time you travel arena to arena, you actually do have to pay. Like it's the local state tax comes into play.
See, now every other post-game show, every other late night show, they're all like breaking down the pick and roll and what Denver could do in game 2 and this and that.
I've ruined this show.
But this is where you come in for like the real analysis, the stuff that matters, the shit that people care about. It's tax policy. And that's why, it's a Friday night and people want to let their hair down and they want to just, let's talk about taxes. And so I think that's good.
It's Friday night at 11 p.m. What do you guys want to talk about? Taxes.
Let's do this.
In the last 15 minutes of the show will be broadcast on C-SPAN.
I have two questions I want to get to before we're done here, because we're technically speaking, but not that matters. We're running out of time and we're just hitting our tax stride. Did you see anything tonight that makes you think, because I assume we all picked the Lakers to win the series?
Yes.
Did anybody see anything that makes you either come off your prediction and make it shorter? I had them in 6. I'm staying there. I think Denver will be fine to win a couple games in the series. Did you see anything that actually, look past X, Y, and Z and Denver really could feel pretty good about it?
I mean, when Jokic and Murray were on the floor in the first quarter, like they scored at a really nice rate. Before they got into foul trouble, that was an offense that the Lakers were unable to stop or unwilling to stop maybe, for the first 12 minutes. But that's a nice thing to look to, there's a template of like, hey, we can get things done against this defense. And they're going to have to outscore the Lakers. So,
well, I mean, I sort of piggybacking onto what you're saying there, Sabreena. Like, if you're Denver, you look at this game and say, all right, certain things are not going to happen exactly the same way. Like, the Lakers are not likely to shoot 25 free throws in one quarter. Like, which by extension means our guys are more likely to actually be on the court and we can create more of a rhythm. And like, what we saw tonight, like nothing that we saw tonight would give me any pause about the Lakers winning the series. But I do think you can look at what happened tonight contextually and say, I still believe Denver can win some of these games. Like I still believe Denver is capable of pushing them. So, you know what I mean? Like there's a middle ground, Brian, to your original question that I see there.
Yeah, I think, Michael Porter Jr. going 0 for 4 in that first half. Probably, as much as I wouldn't put all my marbles in one bag for Michael Porter Jr., that's a weird expression I just made up, but whatever. I didn't want to say eggs in one basket, but all the same. I think like there were certain things like Jamal Murray only made 1 3 in the first quarter, and that was the one at the end. I think you see him probably getting a few more shots from distance, and that's really the place where if I'm Denver, I say, hey, you know what? We need to get him going from distance because that's a weak point for the Lakers. I think if you can get him going a little bit earlier, obviously foul trouble. Like I don't expect Millsap and Murray and Jokic to have 3 fouls and be sitting for large chunks of every single game. So there's some things there. Again, KCP hitting his first couple of threes or 2 out of 3, I think, to start with. Probably not relying on that. Caruso, again, the role players showed up today, right? Rondo had 9 assists, and what's that? I think he froze.
That's all right.
But yeah, I think like everything seemed to go right for the Lakers today, and everything went wrong for the Nuggets today. So I don't think I would necessarily take too much out of this game. I do think it's a bad matchup for the Nuggets. So I don't think it's necessarily 6. I think it's probably 5, especially because. I mean, looking at last series, right? The last 2 series, Lakers kind of like threw up eggs in opening games of both the series coming off of layoffs. But Denver coming off a 7-game win against Utah also threw up laid an egg against the Clippers in game 1. So I expect them to bounce back. I don't know. I think Denver in game 2 is going to be really interesting because I do think that they will probably get called slightly more beneficially, and I think they'll be better at stopping the Lakers from getting out in transition, which murdered them tonight. If that's not the game plan between now and Sunday to stop the Lakers from getting easy buckets in transition / forcing fouls in transition, I don't know what else is. I would basically drill everybody on stopping that. So I think if they start limiting that stuff, they start focusing on getting Murray going from distance a little bit more, and they stay out of foul trouble, then game 2 gets a little bit more interesting. But I think the Lakers just, I think AD and LeBron still the 2 best players, and they just got a little bit too much there. And, LeBron's pretty much unstoppable. And if AD is going like
LeBron was in, because the other thing, I mean, if you're Lakers, if you're Lakers, like LeBron was in cruise control in this game. 12 assists.
Oh yeah, well, the first half he was attacking. Second half he did not score a point. So
right.
he was just kind of like, AD and Rondo got this, and I'm just gonna chill.
All right. So the second question I had though before we go is with the LeBron and the MVP stuff that he was talking about after the game. He admitted he was a little pissed, not that necessarily that Giannis won the MVP, but that he only got 16 votes to Giannis's like 80, whatever it was. Is he correct?
No.
Why do you say that?
Well, we're only counting right before the seeding games. That's when they voted, right?
Yeah,
and
right.
In that time, I mean, Milwaukee was demonstratively better than the Lakers. So you've got the better team argument going. I think he has less talent to work with there because Middleton is not quite the second banana that Anthony Davis is. And just his numbers just eclipsed LeBron James's, across the board. Like LeBron had more assists than Giannis. That was it. That was the only one he was beating him in.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think it's actually surprising he got 16 first place votes, to be honest with you. Like it's and that's not an indictment on LeBron. What's that?
The washed king. It's good marketing.
Yeah. He's definitely ridden that, and he was pissed off, and apparently, hey man, it's like the Michael Jordan thing, right? Anything you can find to make motivation. So and that pissed me off. So it pissed him off apparently. But yeah, no, I think it's surprising, honestly, that he got that many votes because Giannis was Defensive Player of the Year on top of having pretty much every statistical category, like beating LeBron and having better record. The only argument you can make is one of those final games that the Lakers played before the season shut down was against the Bucks, and the Lakers won. So you could say, hey, that kind of maybe gave the LeBron kind of a little bit of an edge, and it kind of brought me back to the year when the Lakers and I think it was like and New Orleans were playing, and Chris Paul and Kobe were in that MVP battle, and it was a late season game, and the Lakers beat the Hornets or the Pelicans. I think it was the Hornets back then. And that ended up giving Kobe the edge he needed to win MVP. So you could make that argument, but in reality, like pretty much anybody and everybody has said Giannis on both ends was the MVP for the regular season. In the playoffs, I don't think there's any question. I said it earlier. It's like LeBron's been the best player in the playoffs, period.
But it's a separate deal. I mean, Andy, do you think LeBron has a point here?
I mean, look, I think he has a point in terms of just the subjectiveness of MVP voting in the first place. I mean, and there's a lot of different factors, including narrative, that can work both for and against different players, depending on how it works. I mean, like there is a narrative that I think some people feel like that Giannis had heading into this season, that it was kind of his trophy to lose, and that a month or a month and a half into the season, everybody had decided that Giannis already had this thing, which would make the narrative working in his favor. There's also narrative factors with LeBron in terms of, beyond just the way he played this year, which was outstanding, and, the control that he had over the Laker offense. And it often was completely dysfunctional without him. There was also the leadership that LeBron demonstrated this whole year through, a lot of different situations that were outside his control, but he got thrust into, whether you're talking about the situation in China, which, ended up, I think, very unfairly on LeBron's shoulders. As much as I think his initial response about China was surprisingly clumsy, just in the sense that he had a long time to think about what he was going to say, there was a lot being put on LeBron, like somehow he was supposed to be leading this issue, like in the league and I guess like America, which was just kind of ridiculous. And then, Kobe's death and, having to deal with, that type of tragedy, for a franchise. And then the situation that we're in now with, the bubble and the pandemic and
Right.
social
And then you
unrest.
the people throwing his age and these
Right.
17 years in
and
all that stuff.
those are different narrative factors that some people might say don't matter. And I could understand where somebody would say that those factors are irrelevant in voting for MVP. But at the same time, there are other narrative factors that people decide are relevant. And there isn't necessarily consistency with it. And I'm not sure there even can be. Like, I don't know if something, right. I don't know if something, if valuable hasn't really been decided what that definitively means. And I don't know if it can be, then it's never going to be completely consistent in the way this voting goes.
The thing about
One thing
go ahead.
One thing I want to say, Brian, before you hop in, is I did agree with him on the Marc Gasol point that he made, though, because that doesn't make sense in 2012.
Explain that for people if they didn't hear it.
So he pointed out that in 2012, Marc Gasol was voted Defensive Player of the Year, but then was also voted second team All Defense, which does not make any sense to anybody. So there is some discrepancy and inconsistency in voting, and I don't think anybody who's been anywhere near the voting process would disagree with that. But I think that's a different conversation argument than who was the regular season MVP this year.
Right, that's the thing. It's like people, you tell you who is the regular season MVP, and I think so much of this is people sort of vote trying to anticipate how the playoffs are going to go, and like who's going to, and that's not what this award is. And there is a massive difference between who is the best player in the league, who is the guy, if you could pick one player to lead you through the playoffs, and who is the MVP of the regular season. Those are not always going to be the same player. You know, because LeBron wasn't trying to win an MVP this year. LeBron didn't need to try to win. Giannis wanted to win MVP. I think it was very clear the way he played and the way Milwaukee went. He wanted to win MVP. Like, they didn't play him 40 minutes a night to do it, which turned into a problem in the playoffs. But it just, Giannis can be the best player in the regular season and still not be the person that I would pick to like first if I'm picking my team for the playoffs. I'd still pick LeBron. And I would have voted for Giannis. But that's kind of why I don't get worked up about these awards anyways, because there is no perfect way to do it. You can't completely divorce storylines and intangible stuff like leading a team through the death of its most iconic player or second most or whatever it might be. Like, there is no quantifiable way to measure that. And at the same time, like, the numbers matter, and Giannis's were insane. It's not like voting for Giannis was a bad idea. So, I mean, it's good for Lakers and that LeBron is angry again, because angry LeBron was great at the beginning of the season too. But I mean,
wash the king, man. Wash the king.
I just have trouble getting worked up over this stuff. I mean, if everybody had voted for Harden, or somebody who
Kawhi
or six. Yeah. Like, okay, now that's stupid. Now you have a bunch of guys, but like, they didn't. They voted for a guy who had statistically one of the most amazing seasons the NBA's ever seen. So I'm all right with it. Yeah, this is what it is. Angry LeBron equals MVP LeBron.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's similar to the way the Blazers are always really excited whenever Damian Lillard doesn't make an all-star team and he goes scorched earth for the rest of the league. Like, I'm sure, like, all these, like Neil O'Shea and all these different executives with Portland, they're actually voting for different players, hoping that Damian doesn't get in, because it's the best thing that ever happens to Portland.
Do you think is it possible that anybody, everybody talks about Ballmer paying off the media to like hype up the Clippers and stuff? Maybe Jeannie.
Did you guys get your checks, by the way? Because I haven't gotten anything.
For you're talking about for the release check?
The Ballmer payoff. That everyone says Ballmer goes around buying the local media. Like, I've been accused of this multiple times. I just want to know where my check is. I haven't gotten a check. Like, I'm not.
I earned that.
I have not, but one of my favorite memes is the stimulus check meme, which is, it's like, $1,200 for, what was it? It's been like 7 months now. It's like, for $5 a day, you too can adopt an American.
It's sad because it's true.
Oh man,
that's what makes it funny.
So,
right.
Good
talk, Shahan.
Sorry, I've insulted Jazz fans, everybody.
That
stop
part
at
was
tax
okay.
road.
The Jaguars part was fine. I'm not sure the lecture on tax policy was necessarily totally needed.
Hey, man, I'm just saying, I'm trying to keep the NBA players safe. And if I got to sell it, telling them they'll be like a few $1 million richer, not a bad sales job.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if Genie paid off the media to not vote for LeBron, just so we get to this point, and he could be really angry. Possible.
I mean, if he wasn't angry before this, you really think he's been like playing poorly?
That's what the rest of the league should be concerned about.
5% more LeBron, 3% more LeBron is still a problem for the Nuggets.
I mean, he just pulled a 2006 playoffs Game 7 Kobe in the second half tonight as angry LeBron. So very obscure.
They were up by
Bad
20
comparison.
in a non-elimination game. Not to get too graphic. I mean, the game was so out of hand that my baby daughter pooped in the bathtub. I actually just, I was able to help solve the problem without missing really anything important in the game. That doesn't.
There was nothing important happening for the majority of that second half. It was well in hand.
Except me cleaning poop out of a bathtub. Nope, nothing important at all. All right, Lakers win game 1. Game 2 is Sunday. Things looking good right now for the Lakers. They are heavy favorites to win the whole thing. It is a lot of information. I already tweeted about it, Ray LP1. Just catch up on what's coming up next week. Monday, it's going to be Bill Orem. We'll keep talking in Lakers Nuggets and the conference finals broadly. Tuesday, Matt Moore from the Action Network is going to join us. And Thursday, we got Dragonfly Jones.
Yeah,
so fun week of basketball next week. And trying to line up some other things as well. Thank you, Sabreena. Thank you, mostly Shahan.
I'm never getting invited back, so it's
plug anything you want to plug.
Just doing Lakers stuff on Twitter. Sabreena JM. It's all there.
All right, that was really, really not terribly aggressive. Shahan, can you want to try? Get out there and really sell yourself.
Yeah, here, Sabreena, I'll let you go. Take 2.
No, we're good. I like your pitch a lot more.
Okay, so for those of you who don't know, I actually work for NBC Los Angeles beyond just sports and the Lakers. So I'm actually a digital news producer these days and have been for a while. I do some editing on the sports side, but I do everything from car chase and wildfires and everything else. But coming up, as you may or may not know, is an election. And we
wait, what?
Go to webs. What's that?
When?
It's in early November, Brian. Early November. We're I think like 45 days out, roughly.
Who's
give or take. I've been off for a couple of days.
I'm gonna look that up.
But if you go to NBCLA.com and you actually search track your ballot or California track your ballot, you can actually find some literature there that will help you track your mail-in ballots. So anybody, I don't really care which way you're voting, but if you're voting and you're worried about mail-in voting and your vote not counting, you can literally track your ballot. You could put it in tomorrow, figure out the process, and you can see your ballot go all the way through and getting counted. So NBCLA.com, where I work, a bunch of other stuff that you can find on there, information. I know we got some crazy wildfires and evacuations and all that stuff, but I think most people are kind of thinking about the election these days. So from an election standpoint, there are some pretty good tools there. Check it out. Register to vote, do what you have to do, and that's my pitch.
That's really cool. I did not know you could do that with your mail-in ballot.
Yeah, California, you can track your ballot. It's we've been plugging that a few times over because a lot of people are worried about that these days. They really are. They're like, am I going to have to go to the polls to make sure my vote is counted? And I mean, you can do that for sure, but there are also other tools that the state has put in place that allow you to be a little more confident that your vote will count.
Well, it's important that everybody get out there and vote. This is a exceptionally important election.
I was kidding, by the way. I knew there was an election coming up. Yes. Totally knew that.
Oh, I didn't catch that.
100% was aware of that.
Exceptionally important.
Bill Orem on Monday and Matt Moore on Tuesday. And thank you guys again. And I think, Andy,
you froze, Brian. We can't understand you.
Our Monday podcast, right? I'm not frozen on my end. Andy was frozen. Well, anyway, we may work on something. That's all I have to say.
All right. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.